Hi, it's Jared from Strong Roots Farm. Welcome back to the farm. Today we're going to be talking about mobile shade structure that we have here for our cattle. I'm going to give you a full tour of this, tell you how we built it, take you through some of the different things that I would change, but it'll take you through all the aspects of this particular unit and give you some ideas for how you can construct one yourself. This is obviously homemade, you can't buy it. We've got less than $2,000 into this. Stick around, I'm gonna show you how to get one yourself. As we take a look at our shade structure today, this has been on our farm for several years now. We're on the second cover, so we had one lost in a tornado, but we've been using this for multiple years and it's been in a lot of our videos and we've had a lot of people ask about it. So today we're gonna go through the complete thing and take the tour, but I have made some other videos about this. So if you wanna see the whys on the shade, do cattle really need shade? Is a shade structure really gonna benefit your operation? You should check out this video, it'll be down in the description as well. But today I wanna show you this specific one and tell you how you could build one yourself. So first, let's give you some measurements. We got a 20-foot by 40-foot shade structure. It is all made out of steel with a 20 by 40 net that I'll have down, a link down from Amazon. This is a 75 or 80% shade net, I believe. And then we have these bungee cord eyelets is all that really holds it on out here. So we end up with 20 by 40 shade for our cattle. We also contain all of our mineral bins, so I don't have to move multiple mineral bins. And then you can see there's some IBC totes. We do not use these anymore unless it was to be an emergency. So this is kind of just, we're leaving them in our pasture for an emergency. We used to have to haul water to a couple spots in our pasture. We've since trenched in water lines and we're good now, but they're on there as well. That is kind of one thing I would change. And then we also added some fly protection stuff to this, and we added some scratching posts, which we'll get to. For the base, the running gear itself, it doesn't really matter what type you use. It can be a gravity wagon or an old hay wagon running gear, but this gravity system was from a anhydrous ammonia tank. If you don't know what that is, it looks like a big propane tank. They usually inject anhydrous ammonia into the ground for corn. You can see it has some leaf springs there. So the front wheels turn a little bit differently under this mechanism than they do a typical gravity wagon, where the wheels will turn, the whole axle turns on the front of this. I don't think it really makes a difference. It's not a pro or a con for mine over somebody else's. It's just the style of running gear I bought. I paid $400 for this running gear, and then we extended the tongue, and that is one thing I would recommend. I extended this tongue out 6 feet, and so that was our base. We got the tongue extended, and we got the running gear. I fixed some bearing stuff on them, plugged one of the tires, and then we were off to building. Next, we started with the actual frame structure. And so I started with the base square that actually hooked to the frame of my running gear. And that's basically where I started my measurements. I did draw this out, pen and paper. I didn't do it in CAD or anything, but I had a basic idea of what I wanted. Pretty good at building this kind of stuff. I've done a lot of this in the past, but we started with that measurement. And that's basically where I would start with, if I were you, is figure out, what fits on your running gear base-wise and get that long base put together. Ours is all built out of steel, and I want you to look at this because it's kind of funny. So you can see we've got lots of holes in it because this was Walmart racking. So this was those big racks that you see like at Sam's Club or whatever that they put shelves up on, and it was all dented. So it had people run into it or whatever. OSHA said, this can't work. We had about 8 pieces of this that were 20 foot long, and we started cutting and grinding and turned it into this. So once I had my square base built, then I went just straight vertical with some H's, and then basically built another base structure on top of that, extending it out over the front and out over the rear. Now, the further that you extend out, the more angled braces you're going to be and need, just because that's gonna flop as you bounce around your pasture. But one thing I will show you here is I am 5.5 or 6 feet from my front beam post here out. And it's really from these front wheels. And so you really have to watch, either you have to extend your tongue out further or watch how far you extend frontwards, because sometimes if I bring my tractor that has a cab, I have a shade roof on my John Deere, we can get really close if we turn too tight. So that's something to think about when you're kind of figuring out your measurements. But basically, we built that inner upper part, that inner base, and then I started making a square on the outside, tacking all this stuff up and extending it out. Now you'll see here on this edge, we came out with our square tubing and then we extended out a little further. This was not an afterthought. I kind of designed it this way because I wanted these bungee cords to go around this 1.5 inch pipe out here. Basically, I figured out the material that I had and just engineered it from there. This square tubing is 3.5 by 3.5, so it's fairly strong all the way out here, but I wanted basically for the bungee cord specifically, that tube. And so I ended up extending that because these braces were those cross member braces on my shelving. So I had a bunch of this, I think this is 3/4 by 1.5 inch square tubing and then 1.5 inch round tubing. There was a bunch of that on these ends that we cut off. And so I just figured out what I needed and welded it on, and you can see it is not perfect. There are some, you know, not so pretty angles and not so pretty welds. We did have to grind off a lot of paint. You can see here, I'll show you my ugly work. Not so pretty, but it's held together for about 4 or 5 years now, and it hasn't come apart, and it gets a lot of abuse. So once we got our upper frame welded out, and I have square tubes, so I had one in the center and then one on each end, and then I extended them past and welded that kind of in a grid pattern you can kind of see. Once we got that upper part done, then I came back in with my angles. And so this is pretty standard, an upper angle, kind of like an overlarge gusset to hold this bracing up out here. You would think that would be fine. Then I went in and put corner angles like this pipe here that you can see. It's a little over-engineered. You know, I put in bracing, and anywhere I could put an angle brace to prevent flexing, I did, because there was a lot of movement here. You have to think about this thing flopping forwards or backwards as you're bouncing. You have to think about it going left or right as you're bouncing. And then it also will topple, kind of like an airplane would, because it bounces through the pasture. So I had to put in a lot of bracing. I overkilled it, but I wanted this thing to last a long time. And so we welded all this in, then we wire brushed it all, and then I literally rattle can sprayed all this. No spray gun. There was a bunch of this nasty red color, kind of looks like case red if you're a John Deere fan, but this was all free. So I had 24 cans of spray paint that was given to me for free. It was outdated, but it worked fine for this. And so we ended up spraying it mainly to protect the welds from rust, just to prevent rust and kind of make it last longer. But it does help. You can tell that some of the old racking was blue because this is where the cattle have rubbed up against it. The only measurement I really went off of that I wanted to be specific was my shade cloth, how big my frame was. And so I went an extra 8 inches. So I'm 8 inches wider than 20 feet and 8 inches longer than the 40 feet to make sure that my shade structure came in the center. And I went on Amazon first and looked up this cloth before I built the structure. And I would recommend that. So figure out what cloth you want to buy first and then build your structure to that cloth. You may even order it, get it in and measure it, see how far it's going to stretch, because that is, you can tell it's a little bit over tensioned here in a few spots. It's meant to do that, but it is tight. We could have went a hair smaller to get that a little less tension on it. Okay, so that's how the main structure is built. Probably looks pretty difficult. If you're not into this kind of stuff and you haven't fabbed a lot of stuff in the past, it's really not that difficult. I like the steel. It's strong, obviously. You can put a lot of weight on it without a lot of extra bracing. Whereas if you used wood, you kind of have to brace that further, especially if you're using 2x4s. A 2x4 really only can hold weight spanning about 6 feet. So you don't want to span further than 6 feet without another angle attaching to a 2x4. And if you get into 2x12s and 2x6s, you really up the cost. You're almost building a home on top in order to hold that weight. So whether you have to buy tube steel And this is funny, I always thought that square stock steel would be stronger. And as I got into engineering and pressure tests, tube steel, round wood or round steel, can hold a lot more weight by height than square stock can. So look at that. If you can afford tube steel, I would recommend buying tube steel, mitering it, welding it, and using that throughout. It will hold very nicely, but you can build these out of PVC. You can't span very far, but you can build them out of wood, but steel is kind of what I would recommend. So that's kind of how we built the overall structure. Then we started adding kind of stuff to benefit our cattle a little more. I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor of today's video. It is Herd Yard. If you're looking for a better, safer way to buy and sell cattle, check them out at herdyard.com. It's free to join, free to peruse, look around, check them out, and you can use code LIST25 to get your first listing for free. Check them out at herdyard.com. So the first thing we added was the IBC totes, and I actually did, you can see they sit just perfect on there. When we were building the base, we knew we were gonna add the IBC totes, and so I measured out my base to fit that perfectly. We did not weld those down, they are clamped down. We used some U-bolt clamps and then some like conduit style clamps, but they were heavier gauge, and we bolted those through. So we got our IBC totes done. I plumbed those together with a garden hose. You don't need to do that. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it. I would put both valves, one forward and one reverse, on your tank, and then you can kind of feed two different waters. They don't need to be plumbed together so that they level out. It's kind of nice to have your options, which one you want to use, or only use one at a time if that's your method. And so we got those on there, and that, you can see there's some green fly tape here. It's actually a couple weeks old, but it's a good place to hang your fly tape on those IBC totes. If you don't need water, I would not put these on here. If you're not having to haul water, this is overkill. You don't need IBC totes on. They kind of get in the way, and that would allow you to make your center structure a little thinner, which you'll see here in a minute why I would recommend that. Next, at work, they were throwing away some floor scrubber pads from our automatic floor scrubber. So I brought these home, used a bunch of Dawn, pressure washed them, got those things super clean for whatever cleaning chemicals they were using on our floor at the plant. And they were in the trash. I dug them out and I screwed them up there just with some bolts and put them through there. And they've been a nice little addition, a nice little kind of scratching post. Now you can see they're kind of full of hair. The cattle scratch, they get full of hair. A couple times a year, I'll pressure wash those out when we get up close to the house. But it's nice for them to have a place to rub. My intention was, if I give them a place to rub, that's where they'll rub instead of just rubbing everywhere else. That didn't necessarily work out. They didn't get the memo. Next, here on the back, I had some of this flat stock steel that came from a shipping container, actually. It's really thin. It came in a box. We slapped it up here, and the intention was we could put a water back here, and then we could hang our fly tape there. And when they would come to the water, when we were being mobile, then that would catch the flies for us. It worked for a while, but what I found is if they can stick their nose on the fly tape, they'll pull the fly tape down. So it ended up being just mainly up high, we left that fly tape, but it was something else. You obviously don't need this. We typically don't even put it back here anymore. We mainly put it around those IBC totes where they can't get to it. And then finally, we've got our mineral bins. So there are 10 on this side, 10 on the other side, and 5 more back here. These were out of scrap 2x12s and some 1xs, all scrap wood. All stuff had chunks out of it or nail holes, and we just cut and worked it in. Some scrap angle iron, some more of the bracing tubes we used to build a platform for that. And that allows us to constantly move our mineral bins with our shade structure. So I only have to hook to one thing now and move it on, and it stays all in here. Now, I did have plywood lids, but you can see the weather got to them, the cows are rough on them, and they ended up getting thrown up on there this year. So my intention is I'm gonna build new lids for this, and I found that Lowe's and Home Depot both now carry a PVC 1/2 inch thick, basically sheet of plywood size sheet, a 4x8, but it's PVC. And so I can rip that down and make lids out of it for these containers. It'll never rust away. It's a little flexible, so it gives some give when the cattle are lifting it up and flopping it back down. And that should be a better cover for my minerals. But for 6 months now, they've been open. It hasn't really affected my mineral a whole lot, but it's nice to not have to move a mineral bin, move a water trailer, move a shade structure, all that kind of stuff. We can hook to one thing and move it all. Well, there you have it. That's our shade structure. So you guys wanted a tour of it, there it is. Now let's go through some of the things that I think are dumb that I would change if I was doing this again. First thing is the width of the base. The tighter you get your base, the more cattle you can get up underneath here, the more room there is. And so I wish I would have left the base in just a little tighter and forgot about the IBC totes, just got rid of them. What I would have had to adapt by doing that is I would have had to put some kind of board up high, whether it was hanging or some steel, something to put my fly tape to, because that is very useful, putting that fly tape around it. It is nice to be able to move water, but I think I'd have been better off either putting another trailer together or throwing one of these at the back of the gator. It just took up a lot of room, and you'll see that the cattle get close, but they leave this 6-foot strip underneath here now, and that's a lot of space. So if you can somehow make this smaller in between, that would have been a huge benefit. Every inch of shade really counts. But if you want to keep the IBC totes, I would do it differently than me. I went and used a Uniseal and came out with a PVC. I thought it would be cool to have a valve, and I wanted hoses going to each tank so they would auto level each other over time, and I could go from, basically I was looking to only water at the back where that fly stuff was. That was kind of my original thought. And then the front tank would gravity feed to this tank, giving me more volume. If I had to do it again, wouldn't have done any of that. I simply would have used the valve that came on the IBC tote. I wouldn't have had to spend any of that money. And I would have made me a little 6-foot hose out of 2-inch hose with a quick coupler, and I could have threw it up on top, and it would have worked for either tank. And then I could have quick filled my totes. So instead of coming out and turning them on and using a garden hose and waiting an hour for it to fill, usually I did that when I was moving fence and stuff. It just didn't work well. It didn't work well with the automatic valves because the gravity just wasn't enough from this high to really let that flow through quick when we first got into the plot. So as you would come into a new paddock, you'd hook up the empty tank. I'd have to wait for a while for that tote to fill so that if I left, they didn't topple it over if they were going for water. It would have to be about a third full before I felt comfortable enough leaving them where they couldn't knock over that empty or filling tote. And the gravity just wasn't fast enough. Whereas if I had a 2-inch or 3-inch hose, something I could quick couple to that and open it up wide, I could dump 250 gallons in 30 seconds and been done. So that's probably what I would have ended up doing. But on the other side of that, I guess a garden hose, if you want to hook a quick connect up or an auto shut off valve so that that tote would always remain full, that's probably a pretty good idea. What I found was 2 totes helped. So we would back graze one day. So I would fill the tote back here, and then I had an empty tote, and then we would pull it forward, leaving this tote full, and then I would fill the next tote up. And so they could have 2 waters to drink from, one under the shade structure and one out in the open. The other problem with the water being back here is I'm putting the water in the shade, which sounds like a good idea, but it's shade structure space that my cattle could be in that I now had, you know, a 6-foot diameter or whatever that square footage would be there where that water was sitting. So that's like the space of where 2 calves would lay. So I would rather have my water really out in the sun so that my cattle could lay in the shade than I would have my water underneath here. But it's a give and take, pro and con, you decide what you want there. The other thing I would have changed, which we kind of already talked about, is if I could have went at least 1 foot further back, it would have allowed me to turn this a little sharper with my bigger tractor. And so right now my tongue sticks further than the upper, about 2 feet, 1.5 feet maybe. And so if you had 3 feet of the tongue sticking out from underneath of this, that would give you enough room from a hitch to turn and not hit a cab, depending on your tractor and different things. But that's definitely something I would have changed. As for the mineral bins, I was happy with the size. They were built out of 2x12s, so that 11 1/4 or whatever a 2x12 is, that's how deep they are. My mineral bins don't need to be that deep because they're really 8x8s there, the square is, and that's not a big enough hole for them to stick their head and get all the way to the bottom of that 2x12. So bigger holes, but not as deep on my mineral bins would have probably been better, which the back ones here were version number 2. And you can see I got I still use the 2x12, but I got a much bigger square, allowing them to get their head down in better. This is where the kelp and the salt and the other things that go back here. If we're testing a new mineral, we've got 2 empty bins back here that we use to test minerals. So if I put a new mineral that I want to test, I'll put it back here. And if they eat that over my other selections, that sounds that they like that, or there's something in there that I'm not giving them. And so that's probably a good recommendation. Another mineral spot where you can test some stuff next to what you're already giving them. That's a pretty good idea. But the other thing I might have changed, I don't know, I go back and forth on this with the mineral bins, is it really valuable to have them on this structure? If you did the Greg Judy or the Free Choice Enterprises skid style mineral bin that you buy from them, you know, you simply drag that across the ground. So that could have been, I could have used that style, which I own one. I have one up there that we use in the winter. I could have simply used that, put an eyelet or a hitch on the back of this trailer, and then a big hitch on the front of that box, and simply ran a chain. And then when I pulled this with my tractor, I was simply dragging my mineral bin, come into my new section, unhook the chain, pull up 10 more feet, you know, wrap the chain up, hang it up on here, and my mineral bin would have been here, and I would have gained a little bit more square footage underneath my shade. Pros and cons: do you not want to hook that chain up? Do you not want to back up to it? Whatever. This is a good idea, but if you can tell, I'm all about gaining as much square footage of shade as I can get for my cattle as possible. And with that, so 20 by 40, that's probably the next question. How many animals can you get around this? And you can see this side isn't shaded, right? But the other side is. So south is this direction. So south is directly behind the camera now. And it's really only shaded on one side. Whereas if I would run this long ways north and south, one time of the day it would be on one side, and the opposite evening time would be on the other side of the shade structure. And that's usually the way I put it. But we only have 14 under this right now, which is plenty of space for them the way it's sitting. So it doesn't really matter. But I've had upwards of 33 head. Now that was 18 cows, the bull, and then all the calves that were around them at that point in time. So 33 head was the most I had under a 20 by 40, and they all were not getting underneath there. The other thing with that, it was a lot of impact. I had to move this every day, especially if it was rainy. They'll really muddy up around here if it's rainy. And so if I know 3 or 4 days in a row it's gonna rain, I won't move this into the paddock. I'll just, no mineral for 3 or 4 days. It's rainy, it's cloudy. You don't need shade structure. And that way they don't tear up around it as much. But right now with the 12 or 14 that's out here, it stays in the same spot for almost a week, and they've got some other trees out here. So I don't need the shade as much. So basically I just kind of watch the impact. That's when I move it. One of the best things, not only am I giving shade and it's helping my animals and they get the mineral and all those things, but the one added benefit that I did not think of when I was building this was that fly protection. And so we use a Catchmaster. I did a video on it, looks something like this, the tape. So it's non-invasive as far as chemicals on the cows. It catches all the flies, but we don't have to spray chemicals on our fields or on our animals in order to protect them from flies. We don't have to replenish oil. It's easily to replace it. And we put that around those totes like you saw, because they're under there when it's hot. So think about your hot time of the season, it's drier. That's when we get a lot of flies. They like to lay under there. It's a good spot to really put a dent in your fly population by putting your fly control underneath a shade structure. So I really like that benefit. I wasn't smart enough to think of that when I was building it, but it's worked out. Well, there you go, that's the tour. Hopefully that gave you some ideas. Obviously, you're not gonna be able to click a link and buy one of these. It is homemade, but now you have some ways that you could build it. When I go to auctions, sometimes I'm looking at stuff as not as what it is, but what I can turn it into. So when you start to think like that, when you get a welder, when you get some fabbing skills behind you and you just start building stuff, and when that brain turns like that, you can really take junk, trash, scrap metal and turn it into something like this. And so this was a huge find for me. Obviously, that racking turned out amazing. We're super happy with this. The one negative of it being this big is it's stuck on this farm now. I can't take it down the road being 20 foot wide unless I was on my little dead end street here and I had to block off both ends, that kind of thing. But I can't take this to another farm. So think about that. Perhaps if you have to move to multiple farms, you're stuck at like 12 foot wide is about the wide as you want to be, maybe 14 if you had a blocker kind of a thing. But think about that, or you need to make a way that you can fold your sides down. But for us, super happy with this. You can make something out of junk just like this, and hopefully now you have some ideas of how to do it. We do have farm shirts still available that kind of look like this. So if you're interested in one of those, they are $20. You can email us down below. We have from extra small to 2X. They do fit a little bit small because they're an athletic fit, but they're a little bit longer. I'm a big torsoed guy. So they're very comfortable shirts, super high quality. If you're interested, let us know. We'd be glad to send you out one of those. We use Venmo, so we'll send you the stuff, you Venmo us, and we send you out the shirt. If you're interested in one of those, please let us know through our email. But if not, we understand. We appreciate everybody watching. Until next time, have a good one.